All right. First question is from Adam Brewster.
Hey, Megan. There was a Republican senator who tweeted a little while ago that you all were alerted today that some absentee ballots were found in Oshkosh and Appleton. Do you know if those ballots were just never delivered to people? And then there's also a gap still between the number of absentee ballots requested versus sent. Is that difference a number that was never sent, or is it your understanding that's still a backlog? So I guess that's two questions really.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. So in terms of our tracking for absentee ballots, I'll start with that one. So the tracking numbers that we present every day, so the number of ballots sent, the number of ballots that have been requested, and then the number of ballots that are received back, all of that is 100% dependent on the local election officials. So all 1,850 local election officials in each city, town, and village across our state entering that data. So for example, when a voter requests their absentee ballot, most of those go right into the system, but some of them need to be processed by the clerk because they're coming in through email, they're coming in through other means, and so the clerk has to manually enter the absentee ballots requested. And so that number is, again, completely reliant on the clerk entering those numbers into the system. The number sent, again, when the clerk goes to send the ballot, they go in and mark the ballot sent in the statewide system. So some of them might print labels out of the system, others might go in manually and one by one enter when they sent the ballot, but that again is 100% dependent on the clerk entering that data into the system. It's not a tracking system in terms of like a packet. It's the clerk entering when they receive the request and when they send the ballot. And the same with the numbers received returned. So as you might imagine, yesterday on election day, the clerks were mostly at the polls, helping with things that were happening at the polling place or organizing their election day procedures. And so even if they did receive ballots back yesterday, they probably just haven't been recorded into the system yet in most cases because they weren't able to do that data entry yesterday. So all three of those numbers are completely dependent on the clerk entering those. We at the state don't issue ballots. We also don't track or record ballots. That again is each of your city, town, and village clerks around the state that is doing that sending and receiving. So that's that piece. In terms of ballot mailing issues that we've heard of, so we've heard of ballot mailing issues from a number of communities. One you probably saw in Fox Point where they were saying that the ballots have been bounced back to the clerk's office. Those were, from my understanding, outbound ballots that had been bounced back to the clerk, and they didn't know why that had happened. In other cases where, we've been trying to work with the Postal Service and find out more information about, if there are any irregularities or issues that they're aware of, if perhaps, let's say, there were ballots that were filed with them to be sent but weren't, and sort of understanding what the scope is of ballots that might still be in transit, either from the clerk to the voter or from the voter back to the clerk. And I don't know that we have a good handle on that yet. We did get a communication from the Postal Service today. I think they had called one of our staff saying that they have 3 bins of ballots from the Appleton and Oshkosh area that need to be processed and sent today. We tried to get some follow-up on exactly what that meant in terms of if those are outbound or ballots that were being returned from the voter, and we don't have answers on that at this point in terms of what ballots they might have that they're still processing. So we're continuing to work with them to see if we can get more information about the ballots that may still be in transit, if those include some of the ballots that were requested a while ago, if these are more recent ballots, and of course we'll be sharing that information with voters and clerks if we do know more information about the ballots that may still be in transit.
All right, next is Ben Meyer.
Thanks, Reed. Thanks for taking the call, Megan. In terms of planning for those of us in the media who have probably covered several elections and are used to polls closing at 8 o'clock on election eve and then results starting to trickle in, this might be a selfish question, but should we be preparing for Monday at 4:00 to feel like election night at 8:00 in terms of how we track and report what's coming in? Can you give us a preview of how Monday might work in terms of what you anticipate?
Yeah, I certainly appreciate that question, as I know that this is a new process and a new set of deadlines for all of us. So right now, what the clerks are doing is they're processing those absentee ballots in most places that they know that they're able to count. So ballots that were postmarked by the 7th or received in their office by 8 p.m. yesterday. And so for larger jurisdictions, they may be coming back today to continue doing that processing. But on the 13th, there is some work that they're going to have to do still. So it's not as if on the 13th at 4:00, they'll press the results button and then we'll all know. They're still going to have to do some of those final things that they usually do on election night to make sure that their result set is complete, and then to transmit those unofficial results to the county in order to be aggregated. So I think in some ways you could liken it to election night. That 4:00 will sort of be like 8:00 usually is on election night in terms of them completing some of those things and getting the unofficial results to the county. But I don't know exactly how long that's going to take. I know some of them might be wanting to get those unofficial results out right away and move on to their boards of canvass for the municipal and the county level, but others may have more work they have to do. They have a larger pool of ballots that they may still be making sure that they're documenting and that they're getting those result sets from each reporting unit up to the county. So I would like to think that it'll be similar to election night in terms of the work that they still have to do to get those unofficial result sets to the county to aggregate, but we're still working with the clerks to sort of understand what exactly they still would need to do on the 13th and how that transmission to the county would work. So we anticipate doing some more training with them this week because again, right now they're processing those ballots. They can count as they come in, but then what exactly do they have to do to notice their boards of canvass, to meet as the 13th gets closer. So we'll try to keep you in the loop too for planning purposes on how we anticipate that will all work.
Thank you.
All right, next is Ben Jordan from WTMJ4.
Hi there, Megan. Thanks for taking my question. I'm just curious, have you guys been able to gauge the total number of in-person voting from yesterday? We know Milwaukee shared that more than 18,000 people voted in person yesterday. Do municipal and county clerks provide at least the total count they had? I know they don't share the results, but have you guys been able to gauge about the number of voters in person yesterday?
So thanks for the question. We do not have turnout results yet, and here's sort of why. So when you think about the usual process for election night results are produced at the local level at each reporting unit, and then they are sent to the county to aggregate and then to post those unofficial totals on the county website. The state actually doesn't play any role in the election night reporting. They're then aggregated statewide by the AP. And so then the unofficial turnout numbers that we see are also part of that unofficial results reporting, right? And so separate from having any sort of unofficial election night results, we also don't have those turnout numbers because the clerks can't start entering in voter participation and other things into the state system until they have completed that work. And so long story short, in some jurisdictions, in all jurisdictions, they're going to know how many voters came in person and cast an in-person ballot yesterday. But they're only going to be marking that on their inspector statements and other local documentation because, again, it's not connected to that result set. And so they will have that information at the local level, but we don't have it at the state until we get those unofficial results that are sent to us. There are some jurisdictions that used the statewide system to help facilitate some of their consolidated polling places yesterday. We actually built a report for them so that they could post some of those numbers on their website. So I believe Milwaukee and maybe a few others did post how many people appeared in person to vote on election day. But statewide, we will not know that as an aggregate statewide number until after participation has been reported by the local election officials. And by statute, they have 30 days to record participation. But we should know closer to the 13th, because at least we'll know what the unofficial totals are, which in turn will tell us about turnout.
All right, next is Rich Kramer.
Thank you for taking my question. My question is about personal protective equipment that was distributed to polling places by the Elections Commission. I'm wondering, where that came from and what sort of PPE was sent out.
Sure, thank you. So when we first developed our plan for sending out materials, we also put together the checklist with the public health official on what we advised for, well, not what they advised to apply for public health processes to election processes. And the State Emergency Operations Center, as we were completing our sort of shipment in order of sanitation supplies, so the alcohol spray and the spray bottles and some of the other things that we were sending to the locals, they also had found that they had some masks, surgical masks, and some gloves that they were able to include as part of that shipment. So it wasn't something that we had anticipated, but it was something that was made available through the State Emergency Operations Center that they included with our other supplies that we shipped. And so with gloves, that one was a little tricky because there's certain points in the process where it might be more useful, but we did advise the clerks that hand hygiene had to remain the number one thing. That, if they had gloves on, it shouldn't kind of produce this false sense of security that somehow they couldn't transmit biological material on gloves. And so we did try to put out some additional guidance on if they chose to use gloves, that they need to exercise the exact same level of hand hygiene that they would without.
All right, next is Sanika. Sanika? Sorry. You there?
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Megan. Thanks for taking my question. We were curious to know when you touched on this a little bit, but are we able to show at all kind of the counting process and getting some of those official results or unofficial results, excuse me?
No, so the unofficial results of any sort cannot be made available prior to 4 p.m. on the 13th. So that's the first time at which anybody could see any materials or unofficial totals from election night. So the number of ballot casts, not how people voted, or the number of people that appeared at the polling location, those are numbers that the local election officials may have and may be able to share, but how anyone voted is not something that they can release until after 4 p.m. on the 13th.
All right, next is Rose Schmidt.
Hi, Reed. Hi, Megan. Thanks for taking my question. Just a couple of things. I guess going back to the original first question that you were asked about absentee ballots and discrepancies, can you talk to us about the numbers between how many were requested and how many were actually mailed out to your knowledge? And I guess sort of along with that, if people if you find out that there are some sort of underlying issues like we saw in Oshkosh and Appleton, are there steps that voters can take? Is there any sort of next steps that you guys can take to bridge that gap for those people who weren't able to vote?
Yeah, thank you for your question. In terms of any sort of remedy, if there are postal irregularities, in the past, there certainly have been people that have called and reported at other elections that they didn't receive their ballot when they requested it, or maybe it didn't make it back in time. Different things that have come up over the years. And, there is no remedy in the law for someone whose ballot doesn't make it by the postmark deadline or by the statutory deadline of 8 p.m. on election day. So the law was changed a few years ago to eliminate any sort of late return. And so under the court rulings, and then looking at the current statute, if a ballot is received with a postmark of April 7th or earlier, it can still be counted until the 13th. But if a ballot is received without a postmark, or let's say it was hand delivered, then it had to have been received by 8 p.m. on election day. And so then if a ballot is received with a postmark on the 8th of April, the 9th of April, the 10th, those cannot be counted under the current court order. So there really isn't any additional things for this election that a voter could do if their ballot didn't make it by the deadline.
Next is Jason Calvi. Jason, are you there?
Yeah. Good morning. Good afternoon. Sorry, it's hard to keep track of the time now at this point. I wanted to ask you about National Guards helping with the elections. Can you tell us why and if certain cities had declined National Guard offers when you originally offered them earlier over the weekend?
Sure. So how the process worked is, we have the most decentralized election system in the country. So we have 1,850 local election officials. So in the process of working with the National Guard, the counties played a really critical role. So the counties worked with their municipalities to help gauge how much assistance they needed. Then the National Guard put out a call amongst their service members to recruit the number that was being reported as needed within each county. And so that number also included some people that were going to be held in reserve in case there was an emergency that wasn't anticipated. And so the counties were able then to work with all their municipalities to ask them who needed assistance amongst from the pool of people that they had. And then the municipalities were the ones that needed to make that request. So I can't speak to any individual municipalities' decisions on that, but it was a decision that was theirs to make in terms of how many service members they needed to help. Of course, there was a limited pool, so if somebody said they needed, 5,000, that wouldn't be something that was available. But there did remain to be a reserve throughout Election Day across the state of people that stood ready if there were an emergency.
And Meagan, you can confirm, though, that some cities did decline the offer earlier?
There were certainly municipalities that felt that they had staffing needed for their jurisdictions. I don't know exactly how many said they needed assistance in terms of jurisdictions or how many said that they did not. But yes, there were certainly jurisdictions that did not have Guard members as part of their poll worker pool for yesterday.
Next is Amanda. Oops, sorry. Trying to unmute you, Amanda.
Hi, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. Going back to the issue of ballots getting lost in the mail, we've heard from a lot of Milwaukee voters who say the website said that their ballots were sent around March 22nd, and they called and they were told that their ballots had been lost in the mail. Is that an issue that you're aware of? And if so, is there anything you can share about that?
I'm not aware of that particular issue. Like I said, we did hear reports from, voters around the state who say that they made their request and weren't sent a ballot, did not receive their ballot. We don't have any information at this time in terms of, if there was, we've heard those dates too, between the 22nd and the 24th that people are reporting that they're shown as sent. And so we have asked the Postal Service if they're aware of any, group of ballots that are still in the processing facility or may have experienced problems, and we have not gotten an answer in terms of how many ballots are still exactly in transit and how many are in transit still from the clerk's office to the voter or how many are in transit still from the voter back to the clerk's office. And so we do hope that we'll be able to work with them to get some more information about ballots that might still be in the Postal Service process.
Next is Patrick Marley.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you, Patrick.
Okay. My question is also about these ballots that were misplaced for Oshkosh and Appleton. And that is, Senator Fan says he would like the commission to go to court to make sure that those are counted. Is that something you would consider that in any way feasible in light of the U.S. Supreme Court decision?
So I'm not sure in terms of any of that as far as feasibility, but it is something that the commission would need to discuss. And I would be willing to bet that they would meet at some point this week to discuss any outstanding issues from the election and what they might want to do in terms of next steps. But we have not consulted with them, so I don't have an answer to that right now.
I mean, is that really the Supreme Court decision was pretty straightforward in terms of saying they have to be postmarked by Tuesday. Is there really any relief feasible for these voters who did nothing wrong on their own?
Yeah, that's my current understanding is that, there aren't any exceptions for the deadlines that were either set in statute or that were set in the court order. And so, yes, it is our understanding at this time that there is no alternative for voters whose ballots were not received by the deadline. So again, they would have to be postmarked by the 7th and received by the 13th, or have been hand delivered or mailed without a postmark by 8 p.m. yesterday in order to be counted.
Thanks.
All right, next is Riley Vetterkind.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just wondering if you could go back and to the extent that you're able, talk a little bit more about the situation in Milwaukee with long lines and only 5 polling sites. I'm wondering if there's anything that the Elections Commission could have done, or whether you think the National Guard could have alerted municipalities earlier about the number of National Guard members that they would receive.
Sure. Municipalities have the authority to prescribe how they want to run their polling places on election day and allocate their resources within the parameters of the law and the guidance that we've given them. So I don't know that there's anything else we could have done in terms of the structure that they chose. In terms of National Guard members, I think, we all found out very late in the process that this was an option. And so whether or not notice would have led to them choosing another route for their polling places and how they constructed those, I don't know. You'd have to ask them that. But, as soon as we were advised of this plan with the National Guard, we had a call immediately with the counties and with larger jurisdictions to let them know about this possibility and to again gauge their need. And so the moment that we were aware, we brought our local election partners into the conversation so that they could plan as well as they could with a few days' notice.
Was everyone given notice at the same time of how many Guard members they would receive?
Yes, they were. So we had, again, a coordinated effort with the counties, and they were sent the totals and the spreadsheets throughout the process as they adjusted their need by talking to their municipalities.
Next is Henry Redman.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
My question is about invalidated ballots, and I was wondering if you know the historical proportion of invalidated absentee ballots and how that might project out to this week because of the flip-flopping of the witness requirement.
So the clerks I do not have the historical numbers because this is a little, like you said, a little different than other elections. But the clerks do track that. So we will have that information upon the conclusion of the election in terms of how many ballots were able to be counted, how many ballots had to be rejected because either they were not timely or there was some deficiency like a missing witness signature. And so once all of the canvases have been complete and once they do the data entry, enter voter participation, we will know how many ballots were potentially impacted by some of those changes.
All right, next is AJ Bayatpour.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Meagan, I talked to the Dane County clerk today, and he had told me that in the initial delivery of PPE for poll workers, there were N95 masks that they had to return and swap out for the surgical masks. One, can you confirm whether you know that some polling locations accidentally received N95 masks? And second, Can you explain the disparity why in some polling locations, like the one in Burlington where Assembly Speaker Voss worked, workers seem to be decked out in head-to-toe PPE, while workers at seemingly every other location did not have such a robust amount of protection?
Sorry. Sorry, I've got you muted, Megan, by accident. Hang on, let me find you. Where? There you go. Sorry. Try again.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. So in terms of the N95 masks, yes, we did hear that. Again, we weren't involved in the procurement or the distribution of those, but we did hear from jurisdictions and from the Emergency Operations Center that there were some N95 masks included with the surgical masks that were initially provided to the counties to distribute to the municipalities. Those were collected. I don't know how many there were of those, but those were collected from the counties and in a few cases from the municipalities where they had gone. We put out some advisories to them too, saying they should double check their supplies to make sure that they did not have any of those, because they're of course needed by healthcare professionals. And so those were then given, I believe, to the county health departments, that they were able to give those back to them so that they could give them to the people that needed them. In terms of any kind of discrepancy, I cannot answer that. Individual municipalities have resources available to them. We sent everyone the same supplies around the state from the state resources that we were able to procure. If they had other supplies at their disposal, they were able to use those, but we supplied the same things to everyone.
All right, next is Eric Lindquist.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I realize there aren't statewide turnout numbers, but I guess I was just wondering, from what you have seen and heard, what your thoughts are on the number of people who did show up to cast a ballot in the middle of a pandemic, and how Wisconsin kind of did in the big picture in terms of carrying out this election in these circumstances.
So I unfortunately really, truly do not have any turnout numbers or estimates. I don't even we've been so focused on the implementation piece and making sure that the clerks have the guidance and the information that they needed. If you look at our website, the amount of information that's been produced in the last week is staggering in terms of how much guidance, resources, procedures, trainings that we needed to provide to the clerks. And so, that's always our sole focus. That's what we do as an administrative agency, is that we're charged to implement the law and to, do what we need to implement whatever is put before us, court orders, legislation. And so that really was where our focus remained throughout this process. And so, my impression is that our local election officials are incredible. They are absolutely incredible. The things and the challenges that they overcame are just astounding and remarkable, that they were able to open their polls in all 1,850 jurisdictions. And so I don't have any turnout numbers, but from my vantage point, our local election officials are amazing.
All right, Chris Rickard.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right. So other than the reports of the missing ballots in Appleton and Oshkosh, have you gotten any other reports from U.S. Postal Service about ballots missing elsewhere in the state?
We have not. Like I said, we did get some reports of some unusual postmarks that some of our clerks are looking at. So again, we asked them to send us examples of what they're seeing. Some of them reported things like a mark that wasn't exactly a postal mark, and they weren't sure what it was. So we're trying to understand exactly what they're getting back so that we can help to prescribe them with procedures on how that impacts any of the counting that they're doing. And so, we are hearing about some different markings on the ballots than maybe the clerks are used to seeing. I can't think of any other places that there were mailing issues reported to me that we've been hearing.
All right, next is Jillian. Just give it a sec there.
Thank you, Megan, for taking our questions. What I want to know is, will we know the number of ballots, the total number of ballots that were requested and sent, but either not counted or disqualified? I'm a little unclear, with the flip-flops, people were told that they could continue to request ballots until 5 p.m. on Friday, April the 3rd. What is the status of any absentee ballots that may have been requested after the original deadline and before all the court rulings came out, I guess? And then are you going to be able to verify if those people who, I don't know, I guess you could say requested and were sent a ballot, did not get it in time, did they actually go to the polls in person? I mean, were they disenfranchised, I guess would be the question.
Thank you for your question. So there are data points that are built within our state system. And so again, this is where all the clerks enter their information. And so, we've been sending out multiple reminders throughout this process, how important it is for them to enter in the data in terms of what requests they have, how many have been sent, and then how many have been received. And so we'll continue to do that so that we have the best possible data in terms of, making sure that we understand where there are currently those gaps in our charts. So the gap between the number of absentees requested and the number sent, that's the first focus, right, is making sure that we understand, were these sent? Is it just a ballot, a delay in data entry? Were there ballots that weren't sent? I would venture a guess that it's data entry, but we'll continue to do follow-up with the clerks on that to make sure that we have a completely clear and transparent picture about how many ballots were sent. And then in terms of how many ballots are rejected or returned late, that is information that they also currently track as part of the process, but is usually not available until they start entering participation into the statewide system. And so I think even today we're going to make some additional adjustments to the system so that we can collect a few additional data points, but we should have information about what ballots were returned by the deadline and after the deadline, and what ballots were rejected for other reasons, like maybe the witness request or the witness signature. I'm not sure, you might have to repeat the second piece if I missed a part.
Shift mandate.
Jillian?
My second part was, I'm unclear after the court ruling, what is the status of ballots that were requested on Friday, April the 3rd, when Evers extended that deadline. Did they get sent? Were those legitimate, or I never understood what happened with that.
Sure. So the court order did say that, so this was, I believe, oh my goodness, one of the lower court's orders said that voters had until 5 o'clock on the 3rd to request ballots. And so, yes, that was always in place. So if a voter requested their ballot on that Friday, they would have been sent one by their clerk. Now, the clerks, of course, have some time to be able to enter that into the system, produce the label, and send it. And so by statute, they're supposed to be doing that within 24 hours. And so let's say something came in at 5 o'clock on Friday and they processed the ballot, that should have been in the mail by 5 o'clock on Saturday. But if the post office was still open at 5 o'clock on Saturday, then it might have been postmarked that day and started en route to the voter. But if it was, postmarked, if the Postal Service had already done their postmarking, it may not have gone out until Monday to the voter. And so this all, relies on the Postal Service and their timelines. But ultimately, if a voter was able to return their voted ballot and get it postmarked by Election Day, or hand deliver their ballot to the polls by 8 p.m. on election day, then that vote would be counted. But if the voter didn't get their ballot before election day, or if it wasn't returned to the clerk by the deadline, or postmarked by the deadline, then that wouldn't be able to be counted.
All right, next is Sarah McGrew.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So my question was kind of more looking forward, actually. I'm in Wausau, where the 7th Congressional District is, and we're wondering, going forward, is there any discussion around that election coming up in May from this past election?
Sure. So on my side, it cut out there a little at the end, but it sounded like you were asking about the 7th Congressional Election on May 12th. So any of the court decisions that have involved the April 7th election did not include the 7th Congressional election on May 12th. And so those deadlines and dates are still in effect in accordance with state statutes. And so there haven't been any adjustments made to any of those deadlines. I do think, of course, there's things we've learned from the April 7th election that we can continue to provide in terms of supports and guidance and creating public health guidance for the 7th Congressional so that they have it as they head into the May 12th election. But as of right now, all of the statutory deadlines still apply to the May 12th 7th Congressional election.
All right, next is Amy Fortilli, sorry.
That's all right. Hi, thank you for taking my call. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. It sounds like you might be able to determine, once all the data comes in, whether you can count the number of people who requested ballots and never got them. So I want to check that. And also, I'm wondering if this issue with the ballots, if it was a big problem with the Postal Service. It sounds like there were a lot of issues with people not getting absentee ballots, and there were a lot of different factors. Was it overall a big problem statewide?
In terms of people that were sent a ballot but didn't receive them, that actually is an interesting data point that would not be accounted for. So we might be able to sort of deduce to get that number, but that's not a data point because that's on the voter side. So the clerk will mark that when they sent the ballots. We might be able to get some information from the USPS about ballots that were in transit still, after the election. But there isn't a data point where we would know whether or not the voter ever received the ballot that was actually sent to them. So that is not a data point that would be available. And again, overall status, all we know is what has been reported to us in sort of some of those scenarios that we already outlined. The ballots bouncing back in Fox Point, voters in the Appleton area, and I think someone mentioned the Wausau area, that were reporting that they requested a ballot but did not receive it. But we do not have any additional data or additional reports of any places where there were ballot mailing issues.
Ed Reams is next.
Hi, Megan. Thank you for taking my question. One is clarification and then a question. As far as the clarification from your statement earlier, once you determine the ballots that were received in time, we will be able to learn which are invalidated specifically for either lack of witness signature, lack of municipal signature, or a mismark or unmarked ballot. We will have those specific data points available.
I don't know that it'll be that granular. So they do track when a ballot was not able to be counted, so when a ballot has to be rejected. And I believe that there is a distinction for late arriving ballots, so ballots that were postmarked after April 7th. But I don't know that we will not know if a ballot was rejected because it was missing a witness signature versus a voter signature versus some other, issue that might have been happening. So I don't think it's that granular, but we will know the amount of ballots that were rejected by each jurisdiction.
So in preparation for a potential request for a recount, how are the clerks prepping for that? And will, if that information is not that granular, will independent observers be allowed to be part of the process if a recount were to be requested?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So recount, and we never like to say that word out loud, but it happens at the county level. So when the municipalities have to pass off the balloting and the election materials to the counties, they have to have really complete records of exactly what happened. And so they'd actually be passing off the ballots and the envelopes and the inspector statements to them. And so yes, each individual jurisdiction is going to have that data. So they'll have a record in their inspector statement of why a ballot was rejected. So it will, it will outline those reasons, and they also have to maintain those records. But they're not input into the statewide voter registration database by that granular of a level. But yes, that information is available. We've also put out some additional guidance for the clerks too, about because we're in this time period sort of between the two deadlines for ballots to be received, that they should be keeping really good records of the ballots that are received between now and the 13th. Make sure that they're marking if they received ballots that had sort of an ambiguous postmark, but that came through the USPS versus ballots that somebody might have delivered and dropped off after the deadline. And so we're asking them to keep very good records and to sort the ballots by those dates, so that if there is a change or if there is a question, that they'll be able to recreate exactly what that ballot situation was, so that there's accountability for what happened in that process.
All right, next is Amy Reed, or A. Reed.
Got it. Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you for making yourself available today. You've kind of touched on this, but just for clarification, are municipalities required to participate in that data gathering on how many ballots were cast that won't get counted, or is it just a guidance that they can choose to follow or not?
So that is information that they need to be entering, I believe, as part of some of our federal reporting requirements. So after elections, there are federal reporting requirements on ballots that are cast, where they do enter that information about ballots rejected. Again, how granular that is, I'd have to take another look at the system to see exactly what some of the codes are that they can enter when they're entering rejected ballots. But yes, they do collect that information more broadly in the statewide system, but they're going to have all the detail at the local level in terms of why any individual ballot was not counted.
All right, next is Laurel White.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thanks again for doing this. You did touch on this before, so I apologize. I just wanted to get down to a little bit more of a county level. I see on your website that Greene County in particular had a pretty high percentage of ballots that were requested but not sent out to voters. Can you just clarify that that is kind of up to the local clerk there to enter that? And so that doesn't necessarily mean that those ballots weren't sent out, right?
Right, and you would need to, talk to the individual clerk about, what their exact process is. The statutes do require that they track absentee ballots using the statewide database, but with all the various challenges that they were facing in making yesterday's election happen, some of them may have been lagging in their data entry. And so they do need to enter that information into the system. So I would expect that we'll see those numbers adjusted in the next couple of days as they enter that information into the system prior to their meeting for canvass. But that is correct, that they do need to enter it into the system, but it's very likely that those ballots were indeed sent. They just haven't been entered into the system yet.
Right. Next is Ben Krumholtz.
Yes.
were these National Guard soldiers already trained to work at the polls, or was that up to the municipality? And can you just explain what it takes to train a poll worker, how long it takes?
Sure. So poll worker training typically happens, or by statute happens, at the municipal level, where the municipality prescribes the training for their poll workers. We do what's called chief inspector training here at the state, and there's a self-exam that's required by the statutes as well that we put together. That being said, with all of the changes that were happening leading up to this election, not just the National Guard, but the influx of new poll workers, there were a lot of calls for people to be poll workers in their community that maybe hadn't before, to be able to serve in lieu of some of the more vulnerable poll workers that typically serve. And so there were a lot of new poll workers this year. And so we decided to put together an entire training curriculum for new poll workers and for the National Guard. And so we train them on the chief inspector training. We also train them on the just regular roles, how to be a poll worker. We had training on the public health guidance. So we put together video trainings on all of these things, voter registration. We also put together training on this new role as sort of a helper or a greeter, where they could help with sanitation or line management, things like that. And so we created a whole series of training videos, and the Guards members all took those videos on Sunday or on Monday after they reported to their armories to go on to duties. They completed all of that training. And so they were able to get that training on all the various roles at the polls, so that, again, they were able to step in where they were needed on Election Day. And that training also served us well for, again, all those other new poll workers, where the clerk, what needed new poll workers in the days before the election, but they weren't holding additional classes because they needed to do things like set up their polling place. And so we did provide that training. And then also on Monday before the election, if there was a jurisdiction that had requested Guard assistance, and they already knew that they were going to have that need, the Guards members were actually sent to train with those municipal clerks on Monday, so they could get an overview of the polling place, start helping with setup, helping with other things that they might be doing on Monday as well.
All right. I'm going to go back and start with people who have follow-up questions. Chris Rickard.
So what I wanted to know was, is that the Elections Commission saying that the problem in getting absentee ballots, or these ballots that were asked for and appear to have been sent but then never arrived to voters, is that problem with the U.S. Postal Service? Is there a problem in the tracking of those ballots by the state and by the clerks, or where is the responsibility here? Do you know?
So I'm not sure I quite understand your question, but the ballots, when a voter makes their request, the clerk enters that absentee ballot request into the system. They then process and send out the ballots from each of the cities, towns, and villages in the state. So all 1,850 of them receive requests and send out ballots to their voters. And so if they're marking it as sent, that means that they've sent it. They've put it into the post office box. They've sent out that ballot. And so if somebody was sent a ballot and it has not yet been received, that would most likely be on the Postal Service side.
Okay.
I don't know how.
So the system is working, though, you're saying? The MyVote system, as far as you know, it's accurate. It's recording what it's supposed to record, right?
Absolutely. And we've gone through on the clerk side and on our side, because we take reports like this very seriously. And so we spent many early morning and late nights looking into the systems, making sure that there wasn't any possibility that things could be, were being missed or weren't being sent. We sent follow-up spreadsheets to all the clerks and said, we show this number of requests in your jurisdiction, but we're showing that you still have, these outstanding requests. And you need to double check to make sure that they all went out. And so, whenever a voter uses MyVote, that also generates an email to the clerk and an email to the Elections Commission. We also capture it on the back end in a backup sort of table of all of the information that's sent. And so we've checked, double checked, rechecked everything to make sure that everything was captured, that there's no gaps in times where requests weren't being made.
All right, thank you.
All right, Laurel White.
I must have just hit it twice, Reed. Sorry, I'm good.
Okay. All right.
Thanks.
Let's see, does anybody else have questions, follow-ups? I think that's it. Wait, I see Adam Brewster here. Did I get you, Adam? Hang on a second. Okay, Adam.
Meagan, just to clarify real quick, you said you weren't sure if those ballots in Appleton and Oshkosh were outbound to voters or inbound coming back to clerks, correct?
That's correct. Yes, I did ask USPS if they could try to, as they are able to give us data, if they could try to differentiate between, an outgoing ballot with the outer envelope or a ballot that's coming back in the certificate envelope. So if we do receive that data, we'll be sure to share it.
All right, Amy Forliti.
Thank you. I just want to double check on another data set. Would you be able to find out the number of people who asked for absentee ballots and then ended up voting in person instead? Is that something you would track if they presumably didn't receive a ballot?
Yeah, potentially. I don't think it's a report that we typically create, but I think we would have all of that data once participation is entered. So that may be potentially something that we would be able to provide, is how many people requested an absentee ballot, but then ultimately voted at the polls on election day.
All right, AJ, did you have a question, another follow-up question?
Diane, this is AJ with 27 News in Madison. How are you today?
Good. I'm having a little hard time hearing you, but
good. I was
try
wondering
again.
if Diane Hallbach was in. Diane, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm sorry. AJ's doing an interview. Sorry. Next is Sanika again.
Hi, Meagan. Really quickly, I just wanted to ask if you have any thoughts on kind of the discrepancy between the number of polling places available. For example, Milwaukee had just 5, whereas Madison had almost 70. I'm just curious to see if you have any thoughts on that.
So, I was just thinking we probably could have a comparison of data. So, we'd be able to run a comparable report of how many polling places there were in 2020 presidential preference versus maybe 2016. And I assume we'd be able to break up that data in terms of municipalities as well. But again, that's, their decision in terms of how they structure their municipal polling places. But I think we would be able to provide data potentially after the election on how this compares to others.
All right, Riley Vetterkind.
Hi, I'm just wondering again, with regard to Milwaukee, I mean, could Milwaukee have gotten more National Guard workers if it would have asked? Would there have been that capacity? And then I was just wondering if you could clarify when everyone was told how many poll workers they would get.
Thanks for that question. So in terms of Milwaukee, I'm not sure, and I don't want to make any assumptions, but I'm pretty certain that they made a request for a larger number than they ultimately received. I do think that they were able to kind of do some cross-leveling then, and then look at bringing in some additional help from surrounding counties that had more than they needed to help supplement in some of those non-resident roles like greeter or other things where you don't have to be a resident of the county. But we'd have to check with them. I'm not sure at the end of the day where they ended with help versus what they had requested. And told when, so we had a phone call with the counties on Sunday before the election, and that was when they were sort of given the outline of the plan and when they were able to make some of those final adjustments to their numbers. It's escaping me what day we learned about this as an opportunity, if it was perhaps I think maybe later on Friday, and we started working with the counties, sending them out the preliminary plan, letting them know that this was available and that we'd be talking to them about it on Sunday. And so I think on Friday is when we found out, and we asked them to work with their municipalities to provide us with numbers. We based our initial numbers off the survey that we did with the municipalities, but I think that that's how that went.
All right, next is Olivia Olivia Richards.
Hi. Does the election committee anticipate any lawsuits coming out because of the confusion challenge with poll access or absentee ballot issues?
I guess that's to be seen. We haven't been sued today, so we'll see what happens this week. But litigation is always possible, but we haven't seen anything to date.
All right, cool.
Next one, I've just got a number 166686.
Thank you for taking my question. I guess, would your commission give any recommendations to municipalities in the future, if this were to ever happen again, about how to deal with elderly populations? We saw 80, 90-year-old people sitting in line for 3.5 hours to do their civic duty. Would you consider offering any kind of guidance in a situation like this if it were to come up again?
I think we've all learned a lot about what this process entails. And so certainly if this was something that we needed to continue to look at in the future, we'd want to look at how we could provide additional supports, additional guidance for any type of voter that might have faced a challenge. So, we have to operate within the constraints of the law. So the parameters of the law are what they are. The parameters of court orders are what they are, and we can't make decisions outside of that. But you're absolutely right. We can provide guidance. And so I think, we need to have a debrief from this election with our office, with our local election partners, and figure out if there are places where additional guidance would have been useful, and to make sure that we are putting that together should it be needed in the future.
All for joining us. I'm going to put, I should be able to get a recording of this up on our website. I'm not sure how quickly, but as soon as possible, if anybody wants to refer back to anything. Thank you again.
Great, thank you.
Hi, I'm John Henkes, president of WisconsinEye Public Affairs Network, and I'm speaking to you today to ask for your financial support. For 14 years, WisconsinEye has provided uninterrupted, gavel-to-gavel live coverage from our state capitol, the legislature, the Supreme Court, the governor's office. We're proud to continue to do that and continue through this time of crisis with important coverage. We are 100% committed to bringing these important meetings into your home or place of work. We've created online pathways that allow us to connect you live with these important events. But WisconsinEye needs your help to do so. At this time, we are facing unprecedented staffing, technical, and financial challenge. So if you rely on our coverage to stay informed on issues you care and need to know about, I ask that you consider a one-time charitable gift today to help us through this challenge. Whether you're following the DHS briefings, the Wisconsin Elections Commission, or leadership briefings from the state capitol, or any of the timely interviews conducted by our senior producer, Steve Walters, we could use your support today. If just a fraction of the thousands who value WisconsinEye coverage say yes with a gift of any size, it will provide a huge boost. So thank you. To donate, please text WisEye to 44321. That's WISEYE to 44321, or visit wiseye.org/donate. WISEYE.org/donate. Or you could send a check to 122 West Washington Avenue, Suite 200, Madison, Wisconsin, 53703. Again, thank you so much. Please be safe. Stay optimistic. We are Wisconsin.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.